encouraged, I guess, by the response. We're getting more and more people register every month now for our Real Learners webinars, and I guess that's a nice sign. I think that we're touching on some topics that people are finding of use, and so I welcome and thank you all for coming along today. It's great to have you all here, and so what we're going to touch on today is this whole concept of higher order thinking, and I guess, I don't know, the first thing I want to do in just sort of framing up what we're talking about when we're talking about higher order thinking is I guess we all have our rock star heroes, don't we? And while I can be a little bit of a Robbie Williams fan, and I was there many years ago now, rocking out with 58,000 people at Telstra Dome or whatever it's called, Etihad Stadium in Melbourne, and so he's a great rock star. My learning or educational or thinking rock stars are people that are rather less well known than Robbie Williams, and probably one's a fellow called Shigata Mitra. And Professor Shigata Mitra is from India, and he was in Australia last week and presenting at a conference in Perth, and so I was very disappointed about that being in Melbourne. But I got some snippets of what he had to say, and the gist of what he was saying was quite provocative. And what he was saying was that he believes that in our education systems, and he thinks this is flowing on into the quality of our workforce and the people that you are indeed working with. He was saying that he thinks we do too much of this, what we call lower order thinking or lower level that the brain works, tells us that is so. I know that myself, I guess if I reflect back, and I've been doing a bit of that because my daughter is doing her Year 11 exams at the moment, and when I reflect back on my study for the Year 11 exams, perhaps it was an imperfect way that I was going about it, such were the distractions in my life, but I know now that I studied really hard to be able to understand my Year 11 and 12 math stuff. But what I haven't done is to be able to apply that thinking in any way. I've received it, I've regurgitated it when the exam came, and then I moved on with my life completely ill-equipped to do anything particularly productive with it. And Mitra's pointing out that perhaps even having exams is the wrong way to go about it. And he's putting to us that what we should be doing instead is asking different questions of our young people. And two that he mentioned in his speech at the conference in Perth were really interesting. He said, so for instance, let's ask our young people, how far does the universe go? And see what methodologies they come up with in being able to find that out, see what hypotheses they invent, and what they're prepared to do to either prove or disprove those hypotheses. And he said we should ask other interesting questions, things like, why do people cry? I think, wow, could you imagine the conversation? Could you imagine the evaluation of ideas that would go on with both, I guess I think about even in our workplaces if we asked that question, and then I think about even in a classroom of even grade 1 students of what they would talk about when we ask, why do we have this button that we seem to push that says that fluid needs to come from our eyes when we get particularly sad? What purpose is that serving us? And so I think that's what Shigata Mitra is talking about when he says, let's get up into some higher order thinking. Let's chew on something that's a bit more challenging and provocative, and let's enjoy being in that space that is not so boring as just here's some information and regurgitated in a test. Another hero of mine in the education or learning space would be a lady called Jane McGonigal. And what she's done is go and look at a heap of work around online gaming. She's a little frustrated that we have the immense hours of brain power being put into solving rather superfluous problems like how do I get this elf out of my house in Game of Warcraft and things like that. She said, what if we could put the incredible tens of thousands of hours of young people's brain energy into these problems? What if we could put those problems into solving real world problems? And so she started to develop online gaming that solves real problems. And she's got one program called Oil, and one other game called Water, where what they need to do is to come in and solve the problem of what happens when the world runs out of oil and what happens if the world was to run out of fresh water. What are the solutions they've got? They implement them in the game, and they find out what both the environmental impacts are, but also what the economic impacts are. They find out where it's best to set this up geographically, and they find out where politically these kinds of things have a better chance of working through these online gaming platforms that she's developing, and saying, could we actually use this mental energy, this amazing problem-solving ability that we've got for something productive rather than for something completely useless. And I think it started to get me thinking a little bit about, where did this ability go? Where did we go from being, when did we go from being really curious people, really capable of, getting our hands dirty and working together to solve really big problems and to engineer really big things and to invent new things and to devise new ways of going to market? Where did that curiosity go? And I actually am really concerned that it's, that's begun in the way that we're doing our education in our schools. And I think what we're getting as a result is something that's rather scary. I think that, for a start, we've got colleges and universities and schools in countries like the United States, who we have a little bit of a habit of following. We're getting them coming out now with worse academic results than the previous generation. Now, that's a first in American history, is that their young people are performing worse. They're kind of, if we may speak plainly and crudely, they're kind of dumber than the previous generation. Yet their self-esteem rates are through the roof. They think they're fantastic, and they're just not. And what it's leading to is a threat to democracy. And look, I'm not trying to get too grandiose here, but nor am I trying to say that you get Donald Trump when you've got stupid people voting. What I am saying is that these days we have a limited ability, because we're so obsessed with, here's the information, just know it. What it means is that when information comes to us, we don't criticise it. We don't analyse it. We don't question it. We're not sceptical about it anymore. And it means that we're just basically being fed, if I may speak so plainly, the bullshit that our media is prepared to give us, and we just accept it blankly. And that's a genuine threat to not only our democracy, but certainly to our businesses. We don't want people coming through our businesses who are incapable of questioning what's really going on in the world. So I guess where does that land in terms of what we're trying to do here today? First of all, I guess just to let you know what today is about for me is this whole concept of you having a really strong understanding of what higher order thinking is. We're going to establish the target, and then next month I want to make sure that you are really clear about the availability of next month's webinar. Is going to be about firing the arrows at that target. It's going to be, so today's about the what, and next month will be about the how. We provide learning experiences that really achieve this higher order thinking. But we've got to get the sights set on what we're talking about when we are, when we are focused on higher order thinking, and know what it is that we're really aiming for. So let's get to work on that. The first thing that I want to do is to point out that I guess one of the things that, this mentality of lower order thinking leads us to the idea of, how did we get there? What's led us to this position where where lower order thinking has become our habit. It's become our modus operandi. And I think that the reason we got here is through a whole heap of assumptions. And the first is around the context of what a learning environment needs to look like, and that it needs to look like an environment where there's a learning leader at the front of the room, a guru with a slide deck, if you will, who's going to ask people present some information and then ask them to regurgitate it. And the way they usually do it is by providing a verbal question and then saying, okay, well, let's see if we've got any hands up in the room. Of course, we know who the people are in your teams who are going to put their hand up. You know also who the people are who will not put their hand up. And you probably also have a fair idea about where they're positioned in the room, particularly if the room congregates like a clump. And that's either with the people sitting at tables or perhaps just appearing and sitting on chairs without tables, which is usually a bit of a clumped way of looking at it. I'll talk more about the clump in a minute. But I think what we've made is an assumption about what the context of a learning environment, beginning from a classroom, and when we were young people, we started forming that assumption. And we've made assumptions about what the context needs to be, and it doesn't need to be that way. I think secondly, we've made assumptions about the purpose of the learning environment. So I think what we've decided is that the purpose of a learning environment is to transfer. It's to transfer information that I have as the guru at the front of the room into the hands of the people who are in the room. And we hope that because we stood at the front of the room and sounded wise and had a great PowerPoint presentation, that they got it. And we know that that's not true either. So the purpose for me of a learning environment is higher order thinking. So whenever I am constructing a piece of training, whenever I'm working with a group, what I am trying to do is to challenge them to get up to higher order thinking level and to not be in regurgitation mode. So I actually actively reject the idea of hands going up. I actively reject it and demonstrate to people that this is a different learning context and that we have a different learning purpose by sometimes even just beginning any presentation or training day, not by standing at the front of the room, but by sitting among the people that are there, which kind of freaks people out for a little while. And then I do things even at the end of the day as well, like I refuse to accept applause. And the reason for it is that, you know, for most people, the Western custom of applause is all about, oh, wonderful, we're finished now. And the truth is, you're not. When you actually are in the learning environment, a lot of the time the intention is to become armed with the equipment you need so that you can go out and do what has to be done. And so you ain't finished at all. The learning moment or that professional learning experience is just the beginning. So I don't let people applaud. I don't want people to go, yay, we're finished, and to have given a day of their time to me with the view that what they need to do is then just, you know, wander off into the distance feeling that, yeah, that was nice, but not really doing anything about it. That's a poor purpose for education for me. I think there's two other competing assumptions that we've made. One is that there's apparently an outcome that we have to strive towards, which means that people need to know something or do something at the end of the training day. So they may, you know, write a summary or report back to their team, or, you know, they need to be able to understand the 7 points to better sales, or, you know, whatever it is that you're trying to, whatever it is the content you're looking to deliver. We fixate on that outcome at the neglect of the process. And what we know about engagement, I want to really speak to engagement today as well with you, is what we know about engagement is that we do not engage fairly, even with an outcome. We engage with a fair process. You think back even to, you know, those days when your mum used to ask you to share something with a sibling, and mum's process, I know that it was in my house, was to allow one of us to cut the donut in half and the other to choose first which piece they wanted. It was excruciating because you couldn't cheat on the outcome. She understood that if you put a fair process in place, that nobody could complain that she had given them the bigger piece or not. Very clever woman, my mum, and I, to this day, resent her for it. And I think the other obsession that we've built here is that the learning environment must be a one-to-many context. So it is that we've got one person who is the holder of the wisdom, and that the learning environment is about a disseminating of that wisdom and putting it in other people's hands. And I don't think that that's what the learning environment needs to look like at all. In fact, I think it should look like a busy environment, a noisy environment, and certainly an environment where things get done. So that's what we're going to be working towards today. So I mentioned that one of those assumptions was clump mentality. The idea that if we pull people together in a clump, put someone at the front of the room who really knows what they're talking about, that people will get it, that they will take what they can from this. And I think that when the work that I've done previously and the work that I continue to do with schools, it proves to me all the time that the clump doesn't work. And I know this because I've watched many young people get together in clumps, such as the one that you can see on the screen now. And I know why and where certain students will sit. I know that there are students in this picture, and I'll point them out in a minute, who are highly engaged and who are dying to answer a question. We'll see them because they will be the students that when you do ask a question actually physically strain with their hands in the air trying to get it as high as they possibly can. And I think you've probably got an idea even by looking at this picture where those students are. But I'm actually more concerned at the moment about the students who are not front and centre and why they would sit there. And I think that most of our students in the clump mentality, most of our young people, most of the people in our teams who don't want to engage at a particularly high level, who are there because they kind of have to be, I think they're choosing the periphery of the clump. I think that they come in and they sit at the back of our rooms, or they sit at the sides, or they, you know, put themselves in a position even right up alongside the presenter, because that will help me avoid eye contact, where they can sort of snigger and do their own thing and hopefully maybe look at their phone occasionally without getting caught. Of course, when you're talking about young people, the kind of result that you get is this young lad here who's decided decided that this is a great position in which to pick your nose and to not get caught. You, of course, then have the people who are fully engaged at the front of the room, who are ready to strain and to put their hands up. And then when we look at the faces, even when you look at the faces of the people at the back of the room there, compared to the faces at the front of the room, you can see the lack of engagement that's going on at the back of the room. So I actually reject this idea wholeheartedly that getting people together in a clump does anything particularly useful. And I think this is a good example of us thinking about the outcome, which is just, did I deliver my message? Nothing to do with whether they got it. So when I talk about focusing on the educative process, I'm going to talk a bit today to a model called Bloom's taxonomy, which really challenges us to walk up to a higher level of learning. But I talk about really strong engagement, really strong process-driven engagement, being around an acronym of LSTD, which is, for me, that is people who are listening, speaking, thinking, or doing. When we look at the picture in front of us here, I actually don't think that there's a particularly high percentage of people who are genuinely listening, speaking, thinking, or doing. Because the outcome that we're striving for here is just delivery of information. It's not about what the kids experience at all. I think that when we do focus on the kids and we get the process right, then we actually get to focus on a different outcome, not delivery, but something that's very clear about what they do. And a guy called Matt Church, who I do a bit of work with, talks to another acronym, not LSTD, but KTFD, which is the concept of when we leave, we should have some stuff that we know, that the K is for know. We should have some stuff that we think, which is, you know what, I get that, that makes sense to me, but it's unformed, it's unfinished yet. I don't really know what I'm going to do with this yet. So I'm just thinking about it. It's under my skin. And it's the kind of thing that, if you're a little like me and with slight neurotic tendencies, sometimes you have to keep a pen and paper by your bedside table, because you're likely to wake up at 2:30 in the morning and need to write something down, because finally that thing you were thinking about, actually, I think I'm going to do that with it. F is something that you feel. And to be honest, there are three kinds of emotions that we can feel in the learning environment, and they're emotions that are either positive, negative, or neutral. The neutral ones can go either way, but the positive emotions that we get, for instance, curiosity, intrigue, fascination, those kinds of emotions can really enhance our ability to absorb knowledge. Then you get some negative affect, negative emotions, and they can be things like boredom, disinterest, offence, are the kinds of things that can make us, if we're feeling negative, then we're less likely to be able to think and to be able to do really good things. And the presenter doesn't have the opportunity to impose their feelings upon you. They won't even do it even if they're fantastic. You could be the greatest presenter in the world, and if somebody in the audience is having a bad day, their feelings will not be impacted particularly positively. So we don't have a great influence over that. The feelings part of it is very much where our audience have full reign. And then the D is decisions, and this is my clear intention, because I think decisions are a higher order skill. Making decisions and being able to identify things in the way that we've been working that are not helpful, and making a clear decision to draw a line in the sand, step over it, and never make that mistake again, is a really highly reflective thing for people to do. And so what we want to do is encourage people into that D. Matt points out that even the etymology behind the word decide is the same as that as nasty words like homicide and genocide and suicide, and the side is about the means to kill off. And when we decide, we kill off choice. We are becoming incredibly clear about something that's going to be different in our lives, different in our work, different in our practices when we leave that learning environment. So my clear intention is always to get people up to that level. And I think that while we're looking at young people here, I think that when we look at the concept of engagement and then negatively what disengagement looks like, this tends to be a little bit more about what we're seeing in our learning environments when people are disengaged, and it's concerning for us, because what we know when we get people like this who are either sitting there and doodle, second fellow there that's got his phone out, he's pretending he's taking notes, but he's clearly not. And then you've got the other faces of the women in that photo there that are clearly, for me, sending a message that says, yes, I'm front facing because I have to be, but there is no way known I'm paying attention to anything that you're saying. And what we've got here is people who are what we call passively disengaged. So when we don't provide positive affect, when the challenge is low in the learning environment, because we're only focused on lower order thinking, I think that what we get is a lot of passive disengagement. Now, that's if you're lucky. to be honest, because the other type of engagement, identifying disengagement that we need to do is when we get very actively disengaged people. And poor old Hillary here is trying her best in her position where she wants to deliver a really important message, but because there's no challenge for the people in the audience, if they just don't like the message, they can up and leave. And there are a couple of kinds of active disengagement, and one of them, as much as this doesn't feel like a particularly pleasant thing when people actively disengage from the learning environment because they get up and walk out on us, or perhaps they didn't show up in the first place, or they didn't come back after the lunch break, this is preferred. This is certainly preferred to getting a little bit of what we would refer to as active disengagement on this level, which is when people stay. And at this point, I'm often reminded that this is because there's no role available to the person that's sitting down. All they hear, all they do, so rather, is receive the message from the person that's delivering it. They make a decision about whether they like it or not, and then they make their contribution. And that's usually because of the feelings. And like I said before, the presenter has no impost over their feelings. So what we need to do is to create a learning environment where people feel something different, rather than just an environment where we hope that the message resonates with them. And I think about this in my world all the time. I have a fella who's a rather volatile bloke that I play a bit of cricket with, and JD, I love him. He's a really fantastic character, a very loyal friend. I really enjoy his company. He's a fantastic fella to be around. But if anyone criticises him on the cricket field, he goes into hissy fit mode, and really is then very hard to get back on. He's blaming the world. He's deciding he's going to retire. He's threatening to walk off the ground. He's carrying on like a pork chop, if I may put it so. And what I've found with JD is you can't talk him down. The only thing you can do is give him a job. And so what I'll do is I'll walk over to JD now, and instead of trying to spend the next 30 minutes calming him down in the hope that he won't leave the ground early and leave us with 10 men on the ground, I'll go over to him and say, JD, I need your help, mate. I've got this young guy on that's going to come on to bowl next, and I really need someone who's experienced to get in his ear and just help him through this. Can you go and field next to where he's bowling at mid-off there, and can you, really get in his ear and help him get a couple of wickets? We need this. And JD goes, yeah, fine. And he heads off over there. And because he's got a job, the next thing I know, he's talking positively again. So this is a wonderful reminder, I think, to remember that education shouldn't be about just the delivery of information. It should be about what the people in our audience, our intended targets, if you will, for the information. It should be about what they're doing. And I certainly have a preference to have JD do a job rather than have him perform like the young lady you can see here in the audience is performing for our friend Hillary again. So I think, unfortunately, one to many is not serving Hillary particularly well here, because people are either actively or passively disengaging from her message, just purely based on whether they agree with it or not. So I guess the next thing I want you to understand is that I'm trying to build a case here for a higher level of engagement, a higher level of activity from the people that we work with. And the reason for it is because of performance, undoubtedly. So when I talk about why we should be thinking about higher order activity, it's because of the competitive advantage that can be gained out of it when we do have engaged employees. And what we found, that what Gallup did with finding surveys, is when they talk about engagement as being that a concept of listening, speaking, thinking, or doing, really being involved in the learning environment, really being active, then people don't just not clock watch. It's not, they don't just give you good feedback. They don't just give you that dreaded applause. What they do is they outperform their competitors. And Gallup have found that it's actually, they outperform up to a level of about 202%. And it made me think, okay, what's the next step? What's the next logical step? And that means in the learning environment, we should be having a really good look at what it is that actually engages people. So when it comes to training and learning, what they found, what the Association for Talent Development found, was that when they go and ask people, what is it about training or learning that engages them, that really gets them listening, speaking, thinking, or doing? About 36% of them said they liked frequent learning opportunities. We actually are geared, when you think about it, as young people, we're made to go to school 5 times a week for 6 or 7 hours. So we're used to really frequent learning. And when we get into the work environment, if we don't have the opportunity to learn new things and to get better at things really regularly, we miss it. And as a result, we tend to disengage. So 36% of people said we want frequent learning opportunities. 39% said they want a breadth of learning opportunities. What's the message here? Is don't just train me for the job that I have this week. Train me for the job that this could develop into over the next few months, or even train me for other elements of the business in which I might transfer into and provide you with, a new level of productivity or a new product that you might even take out there to the market. So we want breadth in our training. Don't just train us on the same thing all the time. It drove me absolutely spare that in schools, when I was working in schools, I needed to provide 2 pieces of training every single year to every single person, regardless of whether they'd done it before or not. So there was one around mandatory reporting and there was one about first aid, and mainly to do with asthma. And if I didn't do that training, then I was going to lose my job. But can you imagine the looks on my staff's faces when that PowerPoint came up for the same presentation that I had given 12 months earlier? They couldn't stand it. Why? They want to learn something new. They want to learn something different. They want some breadth in their training. Do not hit me over the head with the same stick every single time. But you know what? They want those things at a reasonably high rate too. But where we get exponential growth is where we focus on the quality of the training. So what we want to know is, what is it that makes a quality training experience for people? And what we find is that it's when we actually challenge them and we get them up to a higher level of engagement and we provoke them and we get them into the kinds of questions that are Shigata Mitra's questions, big questions that require big answers, that require deep thought and require significant collaboration to get past. That's the stuff that people really want to be involved in. That's when people say that the quality of their learning is great. Most people, based on the usual traditions for how they would measure learning environment, report on 2 things when they provide feedback about training. The first one is that they comment on the temperature of the room, and the second one is they comment on the quality of the food provided. I would like to have those as not the 2 measures by which we measure our education experience, and I think we can do a lot better than people just talking about that stuff. So the way that I view it, guys, is that I think that in any learning situation, if you bring people together to learn together, I think there's a trade-off between disruption. Like I mentioned before with Hillary, that's about active or passive disruption. They just either completely disengage and then they just make it harder for you to run your learning. And then what we get is a trade-off between disruption and engagement. So I think that if you think back even to your time at school, what you probably can remember is that there were no classrooms that were high in both. If there was low disruption, then there tended to be high engagement and interest. And it's Arthur C. Clarke that said that where there is engagement, where there is interest, there is learning. So we want interest and engagement to be really high. And when we have been in those classrooms that are busy, that are productive, where you're being pushed to do extra work and to, think really big thoughts, then you kind of find that the disruption goes away. So, it's the people that either actively or passively disengage just tend to, fall into line with what's normal. And I think that when we've got, the first thing we need to do when we have a highly disruptive situation and engagement's low is we need to unlearn some of those things that we thought we believe, some of those assumptions that I meant earlier on. So I want to spend a little bit of time having a chat about what it is that we need to unlearn today. And what it's about is then saying, can we shift the locus of energy here? Can we shift the locus of activity here? Because when we're in this space where disruption's high and engagement's low, I would contend to you that the focus here is on the teacher or on the leader of learning. It's all about, their job is to control or deliver information and to control the behaviour of the people in that environment. And it's too hard. It's too hard because of the disruption and the disengagement that happens. So we have to unlearn some ways of conducting learning. Then what we have to do is to be very clear about shifting the challenge. We have to shift the challenge from it being about us to it being about them, and to have them starting to think about what it is that they need to get done. That's where engagement, that's where listening, speaking, thinking and doing starts to become part of the imperative. And once we've got them up and about, once we've got that trade-off starting to happen where we've got into 50-50 ground in terms of disruption and engagement, the thing that sends them right over the top, and this sounds a little bit odd, is to provoke. is to be somebody who is prepared to throw rocks, be somebody who is prepared to, criticize, be somebody who is prepared to challenge the status quo. People love it when you lead them into new and uncharted waters. It's an incredibly motivating and engaging experience to have someone who says, you know what, let's go. Let's do something. Let's do something really interesting. Let's tackle something really difficult. Let's say I don't think you're up to this, but you know what? Let's have a try anyway. It's a provocative space to be in where engagement is incredibly high. So I want you to just keep that in mind, because I think that what happens as we move up this model, and for me, I reckon too many people try to move down. We assume engagement and provoke when people are actually not ready for that, because we're delivering it in a way that is still through the old traditional means. And I want to unlearn those, get a high level of challenge happening, and then send them right over the top with that provocation. And you'll notice is at the bottom of this model is where it's all about us, and the top of the model is where it's all about them. That's what really great learning is all about. So what is it that we need to unlearn? First of all, the first thing we need to unlearn is that it's all about my performance. And this is the rock star mentality that I mentioned before when I was rabbiting on about Robbie Williams. And the thing that's different about the rock star kind of approach, and this is why I think that a lot of people are starting to question the validity of motivational speakers, is that when it's all about my performance, my job then is to entertain. And you know what, any of us can entertain. All you got to do is to be a little bit funny, a little bit dramatic, and everything will come off really beautiful for you. And so the job of my job when I'm in a learning environment is not to entertain. If it's all about entertainment, then it's all about me, and nothing particularly happens in the room where I'm entertaining, and nothing particularly happens after it. So even though I really enjoyed Robbie Williams, I didn't learn anything from him. I just had a great time, and it certainly didn't change anything of my behaviour or my life or my practices after that. So entertainment cannot be the target, and therefore it can't be all about the quality of my performance, because you know what, we can't all be Robbie Williams. We can't all be the rock star. What we can do is to deploy a methodology that engages people at a higher level. The second thing I want us to remember is the clumps aren't serving us. It says there that clumps are serving us, or that's what we need to unlearn, of course. So what we need to do is to understand that merely bringing people together and clumping them, they're using that against us. So do not allow the learning environment when you're building one to be all about power. And that's what happens when we put those kids at the front of the room who put their hand up and strain to ask a question. They put themselves there because they want to be seen as clever. And the kids who put themselves on the edge, they put themselves there because they don't want to answer any questions. So we do not want to set up a learning environment that reinforces that power, that sort of power amongst the people who are going to be learners. We don't want a competitive learning space. We want a collaborative learning space. The third thing that I want us to remember is that we need to bust this whole concept and unlearn the idea that it's all about delivery, that it's all about me actually, bringing my wonderful knowledge and just handing it over to you. Education or learning is not like a pizza. So a pizza is really simple because all I have to do is to take it from one place to the other, and effectively it ends up in your hands, and the pizza itself isn't compromised. Education is compromised when all we think we have to do is to deliver. Think about any time in your life that you have used the expression death by PowerPoint. And what's happened is that the information in that PowerPoint has been compromised because of the way that it has been provided to you. So the truth is, you don't care whether your pizza arrives by somebody on a bicycle. You don't care if it's somebody in a car with a giant pizza on top of the roof. You probably don't care if it arrives by drone, because the goal here is just delivery. All I want is my pizza, and hopefully it's as hot as it was when it left the shop. With education, with learning, it's different. We really need to focus on making sure that the quality of that information is enhanced by its delivery. And so it isn't just about getting it from one place to the other. It's very much about making sure that the experience helps people to feel something really positive while they're there. And the other thing that I really want you to be aware of is our default verbs, and they need to be unlearned. We need to stop thinking that words such as all you need to do is to be able to list the things that I've been talking about. Can you now write down for me the 7 ways to market more effectively? Can you write down for me the 5 habits of people who are successful and who are great leaders? I mean, come on. If all we're asking of people is that they need to just write down what we've already told them, then I think that we're in a a bad place. So these verbs here are the ones that I want us to unlearn. I want us to go, you know, we just don't need these anymore. We're going to aim for much more dynamic and much more learner-focused verbs as we move forward. So I think that one of the ways that we can, I think that, you know, I want to sort of unpack for you a little bit about the way you teach a new skill, such as encouraging people towards higher level learning. Whenever I'm working in a school, and I often use this one when I'm working with young people, the teachers tell me these days that they've got an issue, and their issue that they've got is angry boys. So they've got to teach the kids about anger so that they stop flying off the handle. It's the tiniest little things, getting ridiculously angry and making really poor decisions that end up either hurting themselves or hurting other people. So what we do is we take them through 3 steps, because there are 3 steps involved in learning a new behaviour or skill. There are virtually no steps involved in learning a new piece of information. But in terms of learning a new behaviour or a skill or a capability, you certainly need to be taken through something slightly more sophisticated, but they're not all that complicated that you can't get your head around them. So the 3 steps are, number 1 is you have to teach it explicitly, which means you have to provide people with a knowledge base, and you have to have some, you know, language that makes that learning explicit. So when I'm teaching about anger, I teach them the anger rules, which are, it's okay to get angry. About 60 or 70% of our students think that it's not okay to get angry. Anger is a perfectly normal emotion, and it exists only to let us know that something we value has been compromised. But so it's completely normal to get angry. So we teach the kids that you know, it's okay to get angry, but don't hurt yourself, don't hurt others, and don't hurt property. That's the language. We make signs out of it. We mantra it in ridiculous voices, and we make sure that it is just so deeply embedded in the neocortex that you just cannot escape it. We're explicit about the language here involved in teaching it explicitly. Second step is then to apply it to something non-threatening. So we could do some role plays, or we draw some pictures, or I tell them stories about times when I've got the anger rules completely wrong. And then the third thing is to apply it to the real world. So let me apply this methodology of 3 steps to a new skill, such as you guys encouraging other people into a higher level of learning. Let me apply that methodology through chicken nuggets. So what I want you to think about for me for a moment is, what are the 3 most common sizes, the 3 most common boxes in which chicken nuggets are delivered to people? And I want you to get outside of the idea of small, medium, and large. The truth is that there are perfect numbers. There are perfect numbers here for what number of chicken nuggets should be in those small, medium, and large boxes. Now, some people have a different experience of this. Some people have been to places that have been, you know, 5, 10, and 15 nuggets. In some places, there's a maxi nugget box where you can buy 50. But the truth is that the most successful sellers of chicken nuggets in the world are McDonald's, and they've been able to work out that the best numbers for selling chicken nuggets are 6, 9, and 20. So congratulations if you got that right. I can see Amy online today, and I think Amy's heard me talk about this one before. So she's probably got this one right. So congratulations on that wonderful affirming feeling there, Amy. But what I'm asking you to do here is really to recall and then repeat. So I'm asking you to think back to a time that you were in drive-through and that you were buying nuggets, and what were those options that were on that little dodgy board at as you got to the speaker where somebody asked you, "Can I take your order, please?" So all you need to do is to recall that moment and then repeat it or state it back to me. Okay, so not particularly demanding. All right, you either get it right or you get it wrong, and I'm sure most of you didn't find that a particularly challenging concept. But look, if I go a little further with this and I then say to you, okay, I've got a different challenge for you around nuggets. Obviously, if nuggets are being delivered to me in packs of 6, 9, and 20, there are some quantities of nuggets that I can order and some that I can't. So for instance, I can't go through McDonald's drive-through and order 8 nuggets. I just can't do it. I can't get there with any kind of combo of 6, 9, and 20. I can order 15 though, because I can get 6 and 9, and that'll add up nicely. And I can order 26 as well, because I can order a 20-pack and a 6-pack, and that'll work out nicely for me. What I want to know from you right now is, over the next 30 seconds or so, could you calculate, could you compute for me? What do you think is the highest number of nuggets that I cannot order? So as we get higher and higher, nearly every combo of 6, 9, and 20 will allow us to get up to, will allow us to be able to order that number. But early on, while the numbers are small, there are a number of nugget numbers that we cannot order. And so I want you to think about what it is that number might be. But look, I don't want you to strain your brain too hard about it. Then what I do know is that you thought at a higher level than you did on the previous slide, on the previous task. So what I'm asking of you here is that you apply that thinking, and I am just so delighted that Amy can't remember the answer. What I know here is that I'm now not asking you to recall and state, or recall and just regurgitate that information. I'm asking you now to apply your knowledge of 6, 9, and 20, and to compute, which is a higher level of thinking. So just so you don't spend the rest of the webinar trying to work that out, the correct answer is 43. 43 is the highest number of nuggets that you cannot order using 6, 9, and 20. Keep that in mind the next time you're at McDonald's, and certainly don't tell me that you didn't learn anything today. But I reckon there's another level. I mentioned before going over the top and really getting into that space of thinking at a much higher level. And I just love this picture that, we've got a Happy Meal and found an extra chicken nugget. This is the excitement part of chicken nuggets. So the question I have for you here is, what mathematical concepts and what market forces do you think McDonald's deployed in being able to work out that 6, 9, and 20 were the optimum numbers for selling chicken nuggets? What do you think those forces were? And I think that this is a question of, I won't wig you out too much on that by making you talk about it today, or making you think about it today. But I think that what you're about to experience is that if you actually went and asked that question to people in your teams, I think that the level of conversation and the level of ability to think at a higher level would be much higher. In fact, what I'd be asking of people is for them to appraise current approaches, to argue over what would be better, to draw conclusions together, to discriminate between a good idea and a bad idea. Then once that good idea has been adopted, we want them to test that hypothesis and justify it. We need to obviously make predictions about which methodology is going to be a good one to take into account and which isn't. What's good information? And this is that bit about why we're not questioning anything that comes at us in the media. We're not good at being able to predict or to rate what's good information and what isn't anymore. But we're going to encourage people into that just by talking to them about chicken nuggets. So again, I don't want you to wig out too much about it, but the truth is, the McDonald's discovered three key important considerations to keep in mind when they were coming up with the idea of 6, 9, and 20. And the first one is people's guilt threshold, which means that most of us, when we pull into the drive-through and decide that we're going to order chicken nuggets, we've been fighting ourselves for 2 hours about going to the shop and getting an apple and driving through McDonald's and getting some chicken nuggets. We've been fighting, and while we want to have our hunger soothed, we certainly don't want to go past our guilt threshold. And what McDonald's found was that when they took that into account, that this is where they got to the idea of that box of 6, that 6 was the right number for people to have their hunger fixed without crossing their guilt threshold. But then what they also found is that some people had a higher guilt threshold than others, and that's why they came up with the 9 box as well. But almost nobody on their own, and look, if you're one of them, then congratulations, I suppose. Almost nobody on their own buys 20. So what they also took into account was the family appeal. So they said that this was about saying, can we have an opportunity for people who are buying from McDonald's to be able to buy chicken nuggets for the people who most want chicken nuggets? Because let's be honest, I don't know if you're like me, but I don't think I know one child who doesn't like chicken nuggets. So everybody's family, if you've got young children, wants to have chicken nuggets, but the parents don't want to buy them their own, because their threshold for how many nuggets they can eat is how many they can see, but then they eat 2 nuggets and they throw the rest away. So families want to be able to have the option of buying 20 nuggets, because then they can distribute them according to the thresholds for being able to eat that exist within their family. Very important consideration. And the third one was the drive-through imperative, because what they found was that chicken nuggets are purchased far more from cars than they are purchased over the counter. If you go into a McDonald's store, you are actually quite prepared to buy a burger and go to that trouble, whereas a chicken nugget feels more like a snack, more like something that you get on the run, more like something you don't eat as a meal. So what they found was that they paid far more attention to what the quantities of chicken nuggets that were ordered by people in drive-through were than the nuggets that were bought in store, and found that they could come up with a 6, 9, and 20 formula that allowed them to basically change our language, because they have. I wonder how many times you've almost Freudianly called a chicken nugget a chicken McNugget by accident. It's because these guys got it right. And they certainly lead the world in terms of how many chicken nuggets are sold. And so then it's about, once we've unlearned some of that thinking and we've got that intention to move higher, how it is that we challenge and provoke. What does it look like to do that? And so it's about taking some of that 3-step methodology into our businesses and into our workplaces and saying, can I give them the knowledge? Sure, so that they've got a base to move forward. But can my intention be to challenge and provoke such that they think at a much higher level? I think that it would be incredibly important for your businesses that you have people who are understanding that those 3 levers, those 3 that McDonald's had, certainly around family appeal and guilt threshold and drive-through imperative, are the kinds of things that your people are identifying your teams, rather than just taking information and regurgitating it. So it's all about now how we get them to the top. So look, I'm going to first of all encourage you here that I know that this screen will be a little difficult to read and to consume right now. So I want to remind you that you do have the opportunity to download the handout. I've got a little slide that's coming up for that in just a moment. But what I want you to do just before you jump to that, is to just remember those kinds of things that I asked you to do when we did the chicken nugget experiment. And if you remember when I asked the first time, what were the boxes? What were the numbers of the boxes that you can buy nuggets in? You had to go to the knowledge level, which is right down the bottom of what Benjamin Bloom designed for us. So Benjamin Bloom was a fellow that, way back now in about the 50s or 60s, first released his taxonomy of learning, where he said that there are levels of the way that we learn. Not all learning's equal, was what Bloom was pointing out to us. And so he said there's some knowledge stuff down here, but we spend way too much of our time down there. And if you look at what I asked from you when I said what were the nugget box sizes, I really asked you down there to recall and to repeat it to me. So, or to maybe even state it, which is the last of those verbs there in the knowledge section. It's low level. When we got to the next one, where I said, what's the highest number of nuggets that I cannot order? Oh, you couldn't just recall that because you've never worked that out before. You really had to do something different. So if you go up a couple of rungs in Bloom's taxonomy, you can see in the application level, I was asking you to apply, and then I was asking you to compute. And so they're a higher level of learning. So my really strong advice here to you is that if you're building learning, or even if you're just looking for some feedback on your learning, I'd be asking a knowledge level question to make sure they got it. I'd be asking an application level question to make sure that they could do something with it. And then I'd be asking you a design level question, which I think is right at the top in that evaluation and synthesis rungs on Bloom's taxonomy. And you'll notice that when I asked you to then start to think about what were the market and mathematical levers that were pulled to come up with 6, 9, and 20 as the nugget boxes, that's where those verbs came in, where I asked you to appraise, argue, conclude, discriminate, justify, predict, and rate. And to be honest, this is where the good stuff happens. This is not only where you get great product for the people that you work with, but it certainly is where people are more highly engaged. It's where disruption is low, and it's where people, to be honest, they just have more fun. They really enjoy being in the workplace when you're providing an environment that challenges them to think and to behave at those levels. So the great part about that is that while it's a high expectation that having of people, what we find is workplaces that have that imperative about getting people to use those kind of verbs as the things that they do in their work, is that they have less employee retention problems. People stay when they feel that the organisation's really going somewhere because they're asking a lot of them. So it's not about asking people for more time. It's not about asking people to work harder. It's about saying, can we encourage them to work in a more rewarding, more productive, and more challenging, more provocative way. And so I really want to encourage you to, like I said on here, is to download that slide deck from today. It's sitting there as a handout on your control panel. So I really want you to have that and to know that it's all yours. I want to give you just a moment too to have a think about whether you would like, if you have any questions from today, you're welcome to put them in the question box. And also, I guess, if you'd like to have a chat about anything that we've been doing today, if you think it could be of value to your organisation, there's a lot of work that we're doing at the moment in terms of running workshops. This is obviously just a small component, this higher order thinking stuff. So if you would like to have a chat about it, just pop that word chat in the question box. We'll get in touch with you after today. And so we're doing workshops and we're running keynotes, and we've even got some long-term intentions around working with people by coaching and training organisations to do this themselves. We've been training the Australian Navy to be able to compartmentalise all of the things they need their employees to know, and how they can, package up their IP for themselves. I think that it's a really important thing that we don't feel the need to bring those external gurus into our organisations all the time. A lot of what your people need to know is already there. We just haven't found a way to get them access to it yet. So if you would like to chat about that, and we have some long-term partnerships as well that we've been out building with people, which is really exciting stuff. We're really, changing the culture of an organisation into a learning one, and that's really cool to be able to do as well. So if you think that would be of value to you, then of course please whack that word chat in there. We'll follow up, make something happen. So look, I'll finish up there by just reminding you that what I said at the start was that today was about the what. Today was about knowing what higher order learning is, and knowing what we're aiming for, particularly, I guess, in terms of those verbs at the top of Bloom's taxonomy. That's what we want going on. And then the next webinar that we're going to run on the 20th of July, this is how you get it done. How you create a powerful learning experience where the feelings that people get enhance their ability to engage, and they make wonderful KTF decisions. They do a terrific job with it when you create an environment where that works. It's not about bringing someone else in who's going to be entertaining. It's about how could you tap into the IP that already exists in your organisation, and how could you deliver training for impact over applause. We don't want people just clapping, a bit like me. I don't want to even ask about clapping. What I want them to do is to go and do something with it, and that goes to how you develop those learning experiences. So thank you so much for coming along today. Really enjoyed having you all here. Know that you can get in touch. Drop me an email personally there. You can check out my own webpage if you'd like to work with me personally. If you'd like to think a little bit about how real learners could come and partner with your organisation, please feel free to check us out and drop us an email there as well. Or give us a call, 1300 789 422, and we'll see what we can do to help you and your business move forward. So thank you again. Looking forward to seeing you next month, and stay in touch, all right, people.